I stood frozen at the balcony window of the penthouse bedroom, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were showing me. The scene below felt surreal, like I was watching some twisted movie rather than my actual life unfolding. Down in the hot tub, illuminated by underwater lights that cast an eerie blue glow, my wife Gabrielle was straddling some guy, completely uncovered, and from the expressions on both their faces, they weren't just having a friendly conversation. They were actually engaging in intimate acts right there in the water, surrounded by steam rising into the cold December night air. My hands shook violently as I pulled out my phone and hit record. The video was shaky, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely hold the device steady, but it captured everything I needed to see. Every detail was crystal clear. Her head thrown back, his hands on her waist, the rhythmic movement of their bodies. I thought about changing into my swim trunks and confronting them right then, storming down there and making a scene, but something stopped me. Maybe it was shock, maybe it was the need to gather evidence, or maybe I just couldn't face the reality of what I was seeing. Instead, I sat down heavily in one of the plush bedroom chairs and tried to make sense of what was happening, my mind racing through 1,000 thoughts at once. Gabrielle had been working as an executive assistant at Thornhill Capital Management for about 14 months now, ever since she'd landed the position through a recruiter who'd headhunted her from her previous job. She always seemed so enthusiastic about her job, practically bouncing through the door each evening with stories about the exciting work environment, the challenging projects, the dynamic team atmosphere. She'd gush about how much she loved the company culture, how progressive and modern it was, how everyone was like a big family. Now I understood why she was so damn happy. It had nothing to do with the work itself and everything to do with what happened after hours. Earlier that week, on a Tuesday evening while we were having dinner, I'd seen a notification pop up on her phone about the company holiday party. The message had lit up her screen while she was in the bathroom, and I'd glanced at it casually. It specifically said employees could bring a +1, and there was even a note about how spouses and partners were encouraged to attend. When I'd mentioned it to her after she came back to the table, her entire demeanor had changed. She'd immediately tried to talk me out of going, her voice taking on an edge of desperation that I'd found strange at the time. "Honestly, Ethan, you'd be miserable," she'd said, waving her hand dismissively and avoiding eye contact. "These finance people just drone on about market trends and investment strategies all night. Hedge fund managers talking about portfolio diversification and risk assessment. You'd fall asleep standing up. Trust me, I'm doing you a favor by suggesting you skip it." I'd pressed her on it, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with how hard she was pushing back. "I don't understand why you're so against me coming. We barely spend time together as it is. Are you embarrassed to be seen with me or something? Is it because I'm not some high-powered finance guy?" "Don't be ridiculous," she'd replied. But she still wouldn't meet my eyes, focusing intently on her plate instead. "It's just that these events are incredibly boring unless you're into that whole world. I'm trying to save you from a tedious evening. You'd be standing around while everyone talks shop, and you'd resent me for dragging you there." The company threw these parties roughly once a month, and they were always employees-only affairs according to what Gabrielle had told me. She would leave around 7 in the evening, dressed to the nines in cocktail dresses that seemed to get progressively more revealing with each event. Sometimes she wouldn't come home until the next afternoon, stumbling through the door with her makeup smudged and her hair disheveled, claiming she'd crashed at Vanessa's place because she'd had too much to drink. I'd never questioned it before, always trusting her completely, but now the pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Every late night, every morning after, every vague explanation about networking and team bonding, it had all been a lie. I thought back to all those mornings when she'd come home late, how she'd immediately head for the shower, how she'd been distant and distracted. I'd attributed it to exhaustion from a long night of socializing, but now I realized she'd been washing away the evidence of her betrayal. The thought made my stomach churn. "Look, maybe I want to spend time with you regardless," I'd insisted, my voice taking on an edge. "We barely see each other as it is. Between your work schedule and these monthly parties, it feels like we're roommates more than husband and wife." She'd sighed dramatically, her frustration evident. "Fine. If you're determined to come, you'll need to get your suit dry cleaned. It's a formal event, black tie. But don't say I didn't warn you when you're bored out of your mind and regretting your decision." The way she'd said it with such finality and irritation should have been my first real warning sign. But I'd been too naive, too trusting to see what was right in front of me. The day of the party, on that Friday afternoon, she'd casually mentioned I should pack swim trunks while we were getting ready. She'd said it so nonchalantly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. When I'd looked at her like she was crazy, pointing out that it was December and freezing outside, she'd explained that they usually ended up at her boss's penthouse afterward, and he had an incredible hot tub set up on his rooftop terrace with heating lamps and everything. "You do this regularly?" I'd asked, feeling increasingly uneasy about the whole situation. Something about it just felt off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what was bothering me. "Pretty much every time," she'd said with a casual shrug, as if it were no big deal. "Listen, I need you to promise you'll be cool tonight, okay? These parties can get a little wild. The guys there are pretty touchy-feely after they've had a few drinks, and I don't want you making a scene over nothing. They're just friendly, that's all. It's the finance bro culture, you know? Lots of backslapping and hugging and that sort of thing." The way she'd phrased it, trying to normalize behavior that clearly wasn't normal, should have set off alarm bells. But I'd been so conditioned to trust her, to believe everything she told me, that I'd pushed down my instincts. "As long as nothing crosses any lines, we won't have a problem," I told her firmly, trying to establish some boundaries. "I'm not going to stand there and watch guys grope my wife." She'd just smiled that enigmatic smile, kissed my cheek in a way that felt almost patronizing, and said nothing. That silence, in retrospect, had been her answer. She'd known exactly what was going to happen, and she'd known I wouldn't be okay with it. That's why she'd tried so hard to keep me away. At the main party venue, which turned out to be a swanky hotel ballroom with crystal chandeliers and an open bar, Gabrielle had introduced me to her coworker, Vanessa, within the first 5 minutes of arriving. "Vanessa, this is Ethan, my husband," she'd said. And I'd noticed the slight emphasis she'd put on the word husband, as if it were some kind of inside joke. Vanessa had looked me up and down with an amused smirk, her eyes glittering with something I couldn't quite identify. "Your husband? Oh, this is going to be entertaining. You're absolutely insane, you know that?" She'd laughed, shaking her head in apparent disbelief. I'd wondered what the hell that meant, my confusion growing by the second, but before I could ask for clarification, Gabrielle was already pulling Vanessa away by the arm. "I need to go network, babe. Could you grab me some wine? Maybe a Chardonnay? Something crisp and dry? Thanks, you're the best." She'd disappeared into the crowd without waiting for an answer, without even a backward glance to see if I was okay. I'd stood there for a moment, feeling like an idiot, before making my way to the bar. I'd gotten her wine, a nice Chardonnay like she'd requested, and a beer for myself, then spent the next 30 minutes searching for her in the crowded venue. I'd walked through the ballroom, checked the hallway, even peeked into the adjacent conference rooms, but she was nowhere to be found. The place was packed with people in expensive suits and designer dresses, all of them seeming to know each other, all of them engaged in animated conversations about things I didn't understand. Eventually, I'd given up and sat at an empty table near the back, nursing my drink and watching everyone else have a good time. Nobody acknowledged my existence. People would walk past my table, their eyes sliding right over me as if I were invisible. I might as well have been a piece of furniture. After 2 hours of sitting alone, watching my wife's wine get warm and flat on the table in front of me, I decided to leave. If Gabrielle wasn't going to spend any time with me, what was the point of being there? I felt like a complete fool, sitting alone at a party where I didn't know anyone, where my own wife had abandoned me without a second thought. I was heading toward the exit, my jaw clenched with anger and humiliation, when she appeared with Vanessa and 3 guys. One of them had his arm wrapped possessively around Gabrielle's waist, his hand resting on her hip, and she wasn't doing anything to remove it. In fact, she seemed comfortable with it, leaning into him slightly as they walked. "There you are," she'd said brightly, her words slightly slurred. I could smell strong drinks on her breath from 2 feet away, not just wine, but something stronger. "We've been looking everywhere for you. Where have you been hiding?" "Sure you have," I'd muttered under my breath, but loud enough for her to hear. The lie was so transparent it was almost insulting. When she'd leaned in to kiss me, I'd tasted tequila and something else, something salty and bitter that made my stomach turn. At the time, I hadn't known what it was, but the taste had been distinctly wrong, distinctly off. "I was about to head home since you abandoned me 2 hours ago," I'd said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Where were you? I looked everywhere." I've been sitting alone at a table like an idiot while everyone else had a good time." She'd blushed and looked away, unable to meet my eyes, while the guys with her had smirked at me like they were in on some private joke. The way they'd looked at me, with that mixture of amusement and contempt, had made me want to punch every one of them. There was something in their expressions, something knowing and smug, that had set my teeth on edge. "We were just doing shots in one of the private rooms," Vanessa had interjected quickly, too quickly, as if she'd rehearsed the excuse. "You know how these things go. Someone breaks out the good tequila, and before you know it, you've lost track of time." "Shots of what?" I'd asked, my suspicion growing. "I can taste tequila on your breath, but there's something else, something I can't quite identify." "Nothing important," Gabrielle had said, avoiding my gaze and looking anywhere but at me. "Hey, we're all heading to Preston's penthouse now. He's got the hot tub ready, and the view from his rooftop is supposed to be amazing. You coming? Am I actually going to spend time with you, or are you planning to ditch me again?" I'd asked, my frustration boiling over. "Because if you're just going to ignore me for another few hours, I'd rather go home now and save myself the trouble." "Don't be so dramatic," she'd said, waving her hand dismissively. "You'll see me later. I'm riding with Vanessa and the guys, if that's okay with you. Preston's car is a 2-seater, and Donovan's got a sports car, so there's not really room for everyone." "Why can't you ride with me?" I'd asked, even though I'd already known the answer. "We came together. We should leave together." One of the guys had grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the door before she could answer. "You can follow us, man," he'd said in a tone that made my blood boil. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a dismissal. He was telling me, not asking me. Gabrielle and Vanessa had followed them out, and I could hear them all laughing as they'd left, their voices echoing in the hallway. I'd stood there for a moment, feeling humiliated and angry, before getting in my car and following them to the penthouse. During the drive, my mind had raced with dark thoughts. Something was very wrong, but I hadn't wanted to believe what my instincts were telling me. I'd wanted to believe there was some innocent explanation for everything. When I'd arrived at the penthouse building, a gleaming high-rise in the financial district, I'd had to wait for someone to buzz me in since I wasn't on the guest list. The doorman had looked at me with barely concealed disdain, as if he could tell I didn't belong in a building like this. When I'd finally made it up to the penthouse floor and walked into Preston's place, I'd been struck by how ostentatious it was. Floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the city, modern art on the walls, furniture that probably cost more than my car. Gabrielle had already changed into her bikini, a tiny red two-piece that left little to the imagination, and was in the hot tub with 2 guys I later learned were Preston and Donovan, the senior partners at the firm. They both acted like overgrown fraternity brothers with too much money and not enough sense. Loud, obnoxious, and clearly used to getting whatever they wanted. The hot tub was on the rooftop terrace, steam rising into the cold night air, surrounded by heating lamps that created a warm bubble in the December chill. There were other people there too, maybe a dozen in total, some in the hot tub, others standing around with drinks, all of them looking like they belonged in a lifestyle magazine spread. Vanessa had approached me while I was standing there awkwardly near the door to the terrace, still in my suit, feeling completely out of place. "So, you want to hook up later?" she'd asked casually, as if she were asking me if I wanted a drink or an appetizer. "What makes you think I'd be interested in that?" "I'm married," I'd said, gesturing to my wedding ring. "Oh, I assumed you guys had an open marriage or something," she'd said, looking genuinely confused by my reaction. "I mean, given the circumstances and all." "What would make you think that?" I'd asked, my heart starting to pound. "What circumstances?" "Well, the way Gabrielle acts with all the guys here," she'd said, gesturing vaguely toward the hot tub. "She's always been pretty open about everything, and especially the way she kissed you earlier at the party." "What do you mean the way she kissed me earlier?" I'd asked, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. Vanessa's expression had changed when she'd seen my face, seen the genuine confusion and growing horror there. "Oh, God. You didn't know, did you? You really didn't know." "Know what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What are you talking about?" "She'd already been with Preston and Donovan before she kissed you at the party," Vanessa had said quietly, looking uncomfortable now. "She still had their, in her mouth when she kissed you. I thought you were into that kind of thing. I thought that was your dynamic." I'd felt like I was going to vomit right there on Preston's expensive terrace. The taste I detected when she'd kissed me, that salty, bitter taste I couldn't identify. Now I knew what it was. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I'd had to grab onto the railing to steady myself. How long has this been going on? I'd managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Since she started working there, Vanessa had said quietly, her earlier flirtatiousness completely gone now, replaced by what looked like genuine sympathy. I'm so sorry, I genuinely thought you knew. She always talks about how much she loves you, how understanding you are, how you guys have this modern relationship. I just assumed, so she's been doing this for over a year? I'd asked, my mind reeling. For 14 months she's been, and I had no idea? I really thought you were okay with it, Vanessa had said, reaching out as if to touch my arm, then thinking better of it. She talks about you all the time, about how much she loves you, how you're her rock. I thought this was just something you guys were into, you know? Some couples are into that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm feeling really loved right now, I'd said bitterly, my hands shaking with rage and humiliation. I'm going upstairs to change. But I hadn't gone upstairs to change. I'd gone upstairs to get away from everyone, to process what I just learned. That's when I'd seen her in the hot tub with those two men through the bedroom window, and my world had shattered completely. I decided to confront her immediately, and went back downstairs, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The anger coursing through my veins was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. A white-hot rage mixed with devastating heartbreak. She had been coming out of the hot tub as I'd reached the bottom of the stairs, water dripping from her body, her hair slicked back, looking relaxed and happy. She'd smiled when she'd seen me, that same smile I'd fallen in love with years ago, and it had made me sick to my stomach. There you are. Why aren't you in your trunks? Aren't you joining us? The water's perfect, and Preston just opened a bottle of champagne. I'd grabbed her arm, probably harder than I should have, and pulled her into what looked like a study, closing the door behind us with enough force that it had slammed. The sound had echoed through the room, and I'd seen her flinch slightly. What's wrong, Ethan? She'd asked, her smile fading as she'd seen the expression on my face. You're hurting my arm. I'd released her immediately, not wanting to give her any ammunition to use against me later. What's wrong? Were you planning to tell me about our supposed open marriage? What are you talking about? She'd asked, but I could see the panic starting to creep into her eyes. She knew. She knew exactly what I was talking about. That's what Vanessa told me. She seems to think we have some kind of arrangement. I'd pulled out my phone and showed her the video I'd taken from the bedroom window. My hands had been shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. Her face had gone pale as she'd watched, all the color draining from her cheeks. Ethan, come on. We were just having fun. It doesn't mean I love you any less. It's just physical. It doesn't mean anything emotional. You were having sex with them, I'd said, my voice deadly calm despite the storm raging inside me. And apparently you were performing physical acts on them before you kissed me at the party. You deliberately kissed me with their semen in your mouth. Do you have any idea how disgusting that is? How violated I feel right now? It doesn't mean anything, she'd repeated, as if saying it enough times would make it true. It's just fun, just a game we play. It's not like I'm in love with them or anything. You're the one I come home to. You're the one I married. It means everything, I'd said, my voice breaking slightly. I'd pulled off my wedding ring and pressed it into her hand. The metal had felt cold and foreign, like it had never belonged there in the first place. Then I'd grabbed her left hand and pulled off her rings, both the engagement ring I'd saved for months to buy and the wedding band we'd exchanged 5 years ago. Ethan, what are you doing? She'd asked, her voice rising in panic. Stop it. You're being crazy. We can talk about this. You're disgusting, and right now I hate you more than I've ever hated anyone in my entire life, I'd said, each word deliberate and measured. Merry Christmas. I hope it was worth it. Don't bother coming home. I'll be filing for divorce first thing Monday morning. You can't mean that, she'd cried, tears starting to stream down her face. I love you. I don't want a divorce. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. I'll quit my job. I'll do whatever you want. I don't care what you want anymore, I'd said, backing toward the door. I know the truth now. I know why you didn't want me to come with you tonight. I know what you've been doing for the past year. I won't be your fool anymore. I won't be the idiot husband who sits at home while you're out there being passed around like a party favor. Goodbye, Gabrielle. I'd turned and left. My vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. One of the guys, I didn't know which and didn't care, had called after me as I'd walked through the living room. Hey man, you leaving already? You know, that's one hot wife you've got there. She really knows how to have a good time. Glad you think so, I'd said without turning around. She's all yours from now on. Enjoy my sloppy seconds. Or I guess I'm your sloppy seconds, aren't I? I'd left the penthouse, taken the elevator down to the lobby, and driven home through streets that were blurry with unshed tears. Gabrielle had started calling and texting me before I'd even made it to my car. But I'd ignored everything. When I'd gotten home, I'd blocked her number and deleted all her messages without reading them. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her justifications, her lies. I'd spent the next few hours throwing all her belongings into trash bags and loading them into her car. Every item I touched felt contaminated somehow, her clothes, her shoes, her toiletries, all of it reminders of the life we'd built together that had turned out to be a complete lie. I'd pulled her car out of the garage, taken the opener, and changed the code so she couldn't get back in. By the time I'd collapsed into bed, it was almost 3 in the morning, and I was emotionally and physically exhausted. The house phone had woken me up the next morning, the shrill ringing cutting through my fitful sleep. I'd only been asleep for a few hours, and my head was pounding from exhaustion and dehydration. I'd answered without thinking, my voice hoarse and rough. "Ethan, it's me. Please come get me," Gabrielle had said, her voice small and pathetic. "I'm still at Vanessa's, and I need to talk to you, please." "Go to hell. You're not my problem anymore," I'd said, my voice cold and flat. "Ethan, please, we need to talk. I can explain everything. It's not what you think. No, we don't need to talk. And it's exactly what I think. If you have something to say, you can say it through my lawyer. You need to come get your car out of my parking space. I packed all your stuff in it. It's blocking the driveway." I'd hung up and unplugged the phone, not wanting to hear from her again. When I'd woken up that afternoon groggy and disoriented, I'd looked out the window and seen that her car was gone. Good, at least she'd gotten that message. I'd spent the rest of the weekend researching divorce lawyers and reading about divorce laws in our state. I'd barely slept, surviving on coffee and rage, sitting at my computer for hours reading through legal websites and forums. We lived in a community property state, but we didn't own any real estate together, which would simplify things. No kids, thank God, so there would be no child support issues to complicate matters. She made about the same as me, maybe even a little more with her bonuses, so alimony shouldn't be an issue. I'd found that while most divorces in our state were no fault, meaning neither party had to prove wrongdoing, I could file based on infidelity, which would make things more expensive and time-consuming for her. It would drag out the process, make it more painful, more public. I didn't care. I'd wanted her to suffer the way I was suffering. I'd wanted everyone to know what she'd done, what kind of person she really was behind that sweet, loving wife facade. I'd also discovered information about alienation of affection lawsuits, which were still valid in our state. I could potentially sue her bosses for destroying my marriage, for actively participating in and encouraging her infidelity. The more I'd read, the more determined I'd become to make them all pay for what they'd done to me. I'd noted down the contact information for an attorney named Jennifer Blackwood, who specialized in high-conflict divorces and had excellent reviews online. Several people had mentioned her aggressive approach and her willingness to fight for her clients. That's exactly what I'd needed. I'd planned to call her first thing Monday morning. My phone had rung from an unknown number late Sunday afternoon. I'd almost ignored it, thinking it was Gabrielle calling from someone else's phone. But something had made me decide to answer. Maybe I'd wanted to hear what excuse she'd come up with, what lies she'd try to tell. "Ethan, it's Vanessa. I wanted to let you know Gabrielle is staying with me for a few days. Are you really going through with the divorce?" "Yes." "Ethan, she's devastated. She's been crying nonstop. I'm worried about her mental state." "I don't care. She brought this on herself." "Don't you have any feelings for her at all?" "Yeah, hatred and disgust. She's been sleeping around for over a year, and she humiliated me in public. We're done." "But she loves you." "So she claims. Tell me, what did she do after I left? How long did you all stay at the penthouse? Did she sleep with Preston and Donovan again?" There was a pause. She was upset. We all were. "You're not answering my question." "Okay, yes, we all hooked up after you left. But it was just to help Gabrielle feel better. You could have had a good time too if you'd stayed." "Where do people like you even come from?" I'd asked, incredulous. "I have to go, Vanessa." I'd ended the call and noticed 2 text messages from unknown numbers that had come in earlier that morning while I'd been asleep. Both had video attachments, and something in my gut told me I didn't want to watch them. But I couldn't stop myself. It was like picking at a scab. Painful, but impossible to resist. The first message read, "Missed one hell of a party, bro." My hands had trembled as I'd clicked on the video. What I'd seen had made me want to throw my phone across the room. The video had shown Gabrielle with 3 men simultaneously, in explicit detail that left nothing to the imagination. I'd recognized Preston and Donovan, but not the third man. They were using her in ways that made me physically ill, and she was clearly enjoying every moment of it, moaning and encouraging them. The unknown guy had looked directly at the camera with a very arrogant grin and said, "That's quite a wife you have there, man. Too bad you weren't here. You could have had a great time. She's insatiable." They'd all laughed, including Gabrielle, who'd looked at the camera and blown a kiss. The second video had been even worse, if that was possible. It had ended with Preston wiping his bodily fluids on my wedding ring while Gabrielle held it in her open palm, her hands steady, not even flinching. She'd looked directly at the camera with a smirk. Not embarrassment, not shame, but a smirk. And slowly licked it off the ring, making a show of it, her tongue deliberately sensual. Then she'd laughed, that same laugh I'd heard 1,000 times before, and said something I couldn't quite make out. But the men around her had found hilarious. My hatred for her had intensified to a level I didn't know was possible. This wasn't just cheating. This was deliberate, calculated humiliation. They'd sent me these videos on purpose to rub my face in what they'd done. They'd wanted me to see it, to know that they'd taken my wife and turned her into their plaything, and she'd gone along with it willingly, more than willingly, enthusiastically. I'd transferred the videos to my computer, my hands shaking with rage, and made multiple copies for my lawyer. I'd also saved them to a cloud storage account and a USB drive. This was evidence, and I was going to make sure everyone saw exactly what kind of people they were. I'd considered sending the videos to her family and friends, to her mother, who thought Gabrielle was such a sweet, innocent girl, to her father, who'd shaken my hand at our wedding and told me to take care of his little girl. I'd wanted them to see what their daughter had become, what she'd been doing while they thought she was building a successful career. But the information on Jennifer's website had warned against any negative reactions that could undermine my case. Any action that could be construed as unwanted behavior or revenge could hurt my position in the divorce. So I'd held off, as difficult as that had been. I'd saved the videos, though. If I needed them later, I'd have them. I hadn't heard from Gabrielle or Vanessa for the rest of the weekend, which had been a relief. I'd spent the time removing every trace of her from the apartment. Pictures off the wall, her toiletries from the bathroom, her clothes from the closet, even the stupid decorative pillows she'd insisted on buying for the couch. Everything that reminded me of her went into trash bags. By Sunday evening, the apartment looked bare, almost sterile, but at least it didn't feel like her anymore. On Monday morning, I'd called my boss, Richard, and explained the situation. My voice had cracked when I'd tried to tell him what had happened, and I'd had to stop and compose myself several times. I'd needed a few days off, maybe a week, and he'd understood completely without me having to go into all the details. He'd gone through a similar situation with his ex-wife a few years back, so he knew exactly what I was going through. "Listen, Ethan," he'd said, his voice full of genuine sympathy. "I know this is rough, but you'll get through it. It doesn't feel like it now, but you will. When you're ready to start dating again, and I know that's probably the last thing on your mind right now, I actually found my current partner on singletune.com. It's like tuning for singles. It filters out the noise and matches you with someone who actually shares your values. Made a huge difference for me. No games, no nonsense, just people looking for real connections. Tuning for singles or what? I thought to myself. Maybe worth a try. I'd thanked him and made a mental note of it. Single tune. Verify the vibe. Meet the one. It sounded better than the alternative of staying bitter and alone forever. I'd met with Jennifer that afternoon. On the way, I'd stopped at the bank and separated our finances. I'd paid off her credit card and canceled it, then taken half of everything from our joint account and opened a new account in my name only. Jennifer had explained the divorce laws and asked if I wanted to pursue an alienation of affection lawsuit against her bosses. Given the evidence I had, she'd thought we had a decent shot. "Where would you like them served?" she'd asked. "At their office. I want them to experience some of the same public humiliation they put me through." She'd nodded and made notes. A few days later, Vanessa had called asking if I'd meet with her and Gabrielle. I'd refused, citing my attorney's advice to stay away. I'd given her Jennifer's contact information instead. Vanessa had tried one last time to convince me to forgive Gabrielle. I'd shut her down immediately. Tell her she can expect to be served with papers soon, I'd said before ending the call. Shortly after I'd gotten home, the house phone had rung. It was Preston Thornhill, Gabrielle's boss. Mr. Brennan, this is Preston Thornhill, your wife's employer. I know you're upset about what happened Friday, and I want you to know we all thought you were okay with your wife's activities at our company events. So you knew she was married the whole time? Yes, but she told us you had an open marriage and that you were fine with everything. And you never thought to verify that with me? I didn't think I needed to. And the videos you sent me Friday night, what was that about? Those were her idea. Look, I'm really sorry about all this. Is there anything I can do to make it up to you? Yeah. You can let me kick you in the balls after you testify against her in court. Oh, and I'm suing you for alienation of affection. If you really want to make it up to me, you'll accept my terms without argument. You're really suing us? Yes, especially since you've been violating your own company's morality clauses while destroying my marriage. Look, man, this was all just fun. We didn't intend to destroy your marriage. Well, what did you think would happen? Did you honestly believe I just applaud you for sleeping with my wife and treating her like a toy? You've been reading too many stories online. We can work through this. A lawsuit like that could ruin us. Not my problem. You shouldn't have turned my wife into your plaything. Goodbye. I'd slammed the phone down and grabbed a beer, then headed to the balcony for a cigarette. I'd quit smoking when we'd gotten married, but I'd needed something to keep me from punching holes in the walls. I hadn't heard anything from anyone until Wednesday, when they were all served at Gabrielle's office. Vanessa had called, furious. I can't believe you actually did it. You didn't even give her a chance to explain. Do you have any idea how humiliated she is right now? I really don't care. She didn't care about humiliating me with her cheating, so I don't give a damn. Goodbye, Vanessa. Don't call here again. A few moments later, Preston had called from his office. You coward, he'd hissed. I'm going to get you. How dare you sue me? Gabrielle wanted to be with all of us. Maybe you should have treated her better. Go ahead and try, I'd said before hanging up. I'd immediately called Jennifer to tell her about Preston's threat. She'd filed for a temporary restraining order against Gabrielle and her coworkers that same day. Remember what I said, Jennifer had warned. Don't do anything stupid. What if he comes after me? Make sure you have witnesses and don't instigate anything. I'd understood. I'd purchased a small motion-activated camera for my front room and kept a baseball bat near the door just in case. Things had remained quiet for the rest of the week. Then, on Saturday night, while I was on my balcony with a beer and a cigarette, my doorbell had rung, followed by aggressive pounding on the door. I'd looked through the peephole and seen Preston with another guy. Open up, Brennan, I can hear you in there. Open up so I can teach you a lesson. You're violating a restraining order. I'm calling the cops right now. You wouldn't dare! Open up now, goddammit. Take your medicine like a man, you little wimp. I'd called emergency services while he'd continued pounding on the door. The operator had told me officers were already on their way and to stay inside until they arrived. The pounding had continued, and I genuinely worried he was going to break the door down. I'd clutched the bat tighter and waited. God damn it! Open up before I break this door down. I'd heard a commotion and looked through the peephole to see two large police officers putting handcuffs on Preston and his companion. One officer had knocked on my door. Police. I'd opened the door to see both men in cuffs. Preston had glared at me as the officer had led him away. I'm not finished with you, wimp. I'm going to come back and kick your ass. The officer had taken my statement and looked at my copy of the restraining order. We'll be taking them downtown. They'll be spending the night with us. I don't think he'll be giving you any more trouble for a while. The next day, the news of Preston's arrest had hit the papers. Hedge fund CEO arrested, the headline had read. Over the next few days, more articles had come out saying that numerous clients were leaving Thornhill Capital Management. Apparently, their clients couldn't trust a company that ruined their employees' marriages. I'd gone back to work the following Monday. It had been difficult, but I'd managed to get through it. 3 weeks later, Jennifer had called. Good morning, Ethan. How are you holding up? As well as can be expected. Any word from Gabrielle? Yes, she's gotten an attorney and they've petitioned the court for marriage counseling. The judge agreed and has ordered 6 sessions starting this week. They can do that? Yes, and it would be in your best interest to show up. If you don't, The judge can hold you in contempt and even put you in jail. There's no way I'm reconciling with that woman. I understand, but you need to show up anyway. If the counselor sees there's no hope for reconciliation, she'll let the judge know. Okay. Was there anything else? Yes. Her attorney tells me that Gabrielle is pregnant. If that's the case, the court won't do anything more until paternity has been established. So I have to wait another 8 or 9 months? As of right now, yes. If it's your child, you'll be ordered to pay child support. On a positive note, however, the judge has agreed to a legal separation until she gives birth. Jennifer had given me the address for the counselor and wished me luck. When I'd arrived at the counselor's office, located in a professional building downtown, I'd been ushered right in by a receptionist who'd given me a sympathetic look. The office was decorated in calming earth tones, with comfortable furniture and abstract art on the walls, the kind of place designed to make people feel safe enough to bare their souls. An older woman, probably in her late 50s, had looked at me over her reading glasses as I'd entered. Gabrielle had sat across from her on a love seat, looking miserable and small, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She'd looked up when I'd entered, hope flickering across her face, but I'd looked away immediately. The counselor had introduced herself as Dr. Margaret Pemberton, extending her hand for a professional handshake, and indicated I should sit next to Gabrielle on the love seat. The suggestion had made my skin crawl. I'd chosen instead to sit in a wooden chair positioned at a 45-degree angle to the love seat, as far from Gabrielle as I could get while still being in the same conversation. "Good to see you could make it, Mr. Brennan," Dr. Pemberton had said, her voice professionally warm. "I understand I have no choice," I'd said, crossing my arms defensively across my chest. "My lawyer informed me that if I don't attend, the judge can hold me in contempt of court, so here I am." "True, still, I'm glad you're here. These sessions can be very productive if both parties are willing to engage honestly." She'd turned to Gabrielle, her expression softening slightly. "Tell me, Mrs. Brennan, what do you hope to get from these sessions?" "I want to get back together with my husband," Gabrielle had said, her voice trembling. "We're going to have a baby, and I want to be a family again. I want us to raise our child together the way it should be. I made a terrible mistake, and I want the chance to make it right." I'd snorted in derision, unable to help myself. The sound had been loud in the quiet office. Dr. Pemberton had looked at me, one eyebrow raised. "And what do you hope to get out of these sessions, Mr. Brennan?" "What I want is for you to realize there's no way I'm reconciling with her," I'd said, nodding toward Gabrielle without looking at her. "I want you to write your report to the judge saying that reconciliation is impossible, so we can move forward with the divorce. That's the only reason I'm here." "Not even for the sake of the child?" Dr. Pemberton had asked, her tone carefully neutral. "I honestly don't think it's my child," I'd said bluntly. "If by some miracle it is, I'll pay child support and I'll do everything I can to be a father to it, but there's no way I'm reconciling with her. Period. End of discussion." I'd pulled out my phone and brought up the videos, then handed the phone to Dr. Pemberton. "Before we go any further, I think you should see these. They were sent to me the night I discovered my wife's activities." Dr. Pemberton had watched the videos, her expression growing increasingly disgusted. I'd watched her face carefully, seeing the moment when professional neutrality gave way to genuine revulsion. When she'd finished, she'd handed the phone back to me without a word, taking a moment to compose herself. "I see you're married, doctor," I'd said, gesturing to the wedding ring on her finger. "Tell me, if that was your husband in those videos instead of her, would you want to reconcile? And what if you learned he'd been doing that to you for more than a year, lying to your face every single day, and actually did it in front of you at a party where he'd invited you specifically to humiliate you? Would you reconcile then?" "This isn't about me, Mr. Brennan," she'd said, but her voice had lost some of its professional warmth. "This is about the two of you, and now you have a little one to think about." "Wrong, doctor. She has a little one to think about. I don't believe her child is mine. In fact, I'd be willing to bet money on it. But I would like a few answers from her, though, since we're all here and the court is paying for this session." Dr. Pemberton had thought for a moment, glancing between us, then nodded slowly. "I think he's entitled to some answers. Don't you, Mrs. Brennan?" Gabrielle had looked down at her hands, her face burning with embarrassment, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "I guess so," she'd whispered. "The floor is yours, Mr. Brennan," Dr. Pemberton had told me. I'd leaned forward in my chair, my voice cold and controlled. "The night of the party, you knew what was going to happen, didn't you? You knew exactly what you were planning to do." "Yes," Gabrielle had admitted quietly. "And that's the real reason you didn't want me to go with you, isn't it?" Not because I'd be bored, but because you didn't want me to see what you were really doing at these parties. Yes, I tried to warn you that you wouldn't have any fun. I tried to keep you away. When you kissed me at the party, you deliberately made sure you had those two men's semen in your mouth when you did, didn't you? That wasn't an accident. That was intentional. Her face had turned bright red and she'd started crying. Yes. Why? I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Did I do something to deserve that kind of humiliation? Did I mistreat you? Did I cheat on you? Did I give you any reason to do that to me? You did nothing, she'd sobbed. You were perfect. We just thought it would be wicked and exciting. It was like a game to them. To us. I'm so sorry. So all of you planned to humiliate me, didn't you? You sat around and discussed how you were going to make a fool out of me. And you intended to humiliate me even further at Preston's place, didn't you? Yes and yes, she'd admitted, tears streaming down her face. How long have you been sleeping with those guys? And don't lie to me, I want the truth. Pretty much from the time I joined Thornhill Capital, maybe a month after I started. Why? I'd asked, genuinely wanting to understand. Why would you do this? What did I do wrong? She'd shrugged helplessly, wiping at her tears. Because I liked it. It was fun. It was naughty and exciting. They made me feel desired, wanted. It was like being the center of attention, and I was captivated by that feeling. How many times did you kiss me with their fluids still in your mouth? How many times did you come home from one of these parties and kiss me goodnight, or make love to me, with their semen still inside you? I don't know. A few times, maybe more. I don't remember exactly. I'd felt like throwing up, but had managed to keep myself under control, my hands gripping the arms of the chair so tightly my knuckles had turned white. How many men have you slept with since you started there? Not counting me. I want a number. I don't know exactly, maybe 4 or 5 dozen. I didn't keep count. 4 or 5 dozen? I'd repeated, my voice incredulous. You've slept with 48 to 60 other men over the last year? My God, woman, are you out of your mind? Haven't you heard of STDs, HIV, hepatitis? What, were you trying to harm me with something? Do you even know who the father of this child is? Not 100%, she'd admitted, her voice barely audible. But you expect me to raise it and pay for it, don't you? You expect me to just forgive and forget? To play happy family while raising some other man's child? You're a real piece of work, you know that. But I love you, she'd said quietly, desperately. I've always loved you. This didn't change that. Well, I don't love you, I'd said, each word deliberate and final. Not anymore. In fact, I hate your guts right now, and I hope you rot in hell for what you've done to me. Both of them had looked at me, shocked by the venom in my voice. Gabrielle had looked like she was about to completely break down, but I hadn't cared. I'd wanted her to hurt the way I was hurting. That's enough, Mr. Brennan, Dr. Pemberton had said firmly. You've made your point. I see you're determined to throw away 5 good years of marriage. I didn't throw anything away. She did the first time she spread her legs for another man. And it wasn't 5 good years. 4, maybe. The last year, she wasn't really my wife. She was just a receptacle for everything she could get her hands on. You heard her. She slept with 48 to 60 men over the last year. She doesn't even know who the father of her child is. No, I will never reconcile with her. All right, I think we've heard enough for today. I want to have a session with each of you individually, but then we'll go from there. We'd scheduled our appointments for the following week and left. I'd heard Gabrielle call out to me in the parking lot, but I'd ignored her and gone to my car. As I'd pulled out, I'd seen her slumped over her steering wheel, sobbing. That night, I'd gotten a call from an angry Vanessa. I hope you're happy. Gabrielle is in the hospital. She suffered a pregnancy loss. She told me what you said and the way you treated her. So what do you want, sympathy? I simply told the truth, which is a lot more than she did this last year. Didn't you hear what I said? Your wife is in the hospital. Don't you care about that? Frankly, no, I don't. My God, you really are a cruel man. Well, you guys only have yourselves to thank for that. The very least you can do is go down and give them your insurance information. Legally, she's still your wife, and you'll end up getting the bills anyway. I'd calmed down and remembered what Jennifer had told me about not doing anything stupid. All right, and what room is she in? I'd gone to the hospital and given them my insurance information. I'd briefly spoken to the doctor. Any idea what caused this? He'd shaken his head. It's hard to say. There are a number of things that can happen in a pregnancy. How far along was she? I'd say maybe 9 or 10 weeks along. That meant it was possible the child could have been mine. I would never know. However, it didn't matter. As far as I was concerned, Her miscarriage only meant the divorce could proceed. How's she doing? She'll be okay. I want to keep an eye on her for a little bit, but she'll be able to go home in a couple hours or so. Thanks. I'd gone into her room. She'd looked terrible lying there in the bed. She'd looked at me with tears in her eyes. Vanessa had stood at the end of her bed. Are you happy now? Vanessa had spat at me. Be quiet, I'd growled. Vanessa had recoiled and left the room. I'd turned to look at Gabrielle. I guess we're really through, aren't we? I'd nodded. Yeah, we are. Do you really hate me as much as you said earlier today? Right this second, no. But there's no way I'm taking you back. You've proven that I could never trust you out of my sight. Every time you went to the store, I'd sit at home wondering if you were sleeping with the clerks at the checkout stand. Besides, I simply can't get past your blatant disrespect. I don't get it. I treated you like a queen all those years. Did I do something to make you turn your back on me all of a sudden? No, you were the best husband and lover a girl could want. Obviously not, or you would have told those clowns to bug off. It wasn't you, it was me. They brought out the bad side of me and told me that every guy wants to see his wife with other men. I guess I just bought into their lies. I saw the other girls doing it and thought, why should I miss out on all the fun? And that's all it was? Just fun? Yeah. It's all fun and games until the spouse finds out. I'd waited a few moments before continuing. Look, the divorce is going to happen no matter what you do. All you're doing is wasting your time and money. End this charade and move on, okay? We're done. I'm never taking you back. All right, she'd said quietly, tears falling down her face. I'll tell my lawyer tomorrow. And don't ask if we can be friends. I don't see that happening. The tears had kept falling. I'm really sorry. I'd looked at her for a few moments. Yeah, goodbye, Gabrielle. I could hear her crying as I'd walked away. A few days later, Jennifer had called. True to her word, Gabrielle had dropped all her objections to the divorce. Dr. Pemberton had written a report saying reconciliation was impossible. She'd included a suggestion that I go through anger management, but the judge had stopped short of making it an order. Jennifer had managed to get settlements from Thornhill Capital Management as well as Preston and Donovan personally. About a month later, she'd handed me the largest check I'd ever seen in my life. That's minus my take, of course. Of course. I'd deposited the check and gone on with my life, such as it was. Thornhill Capital Management closed its doors about 6 months later. It seemed their clients felt they couldn't trust the company with their money. I never heard from Preston and Donovan after that day at the apartment. They both spent 30 days in county jail for their stunt and apparently didn't want to go back. Their reputations in the community were destroyed, and they left for the West Coast. Gabrielle and Vanessa continued living in the same apartment and ended up working at a retail store in a strip mall, one of those places that specialized in women's clothing and cosmetics. I saw them around from time to time, but never acknowledged their presence. I stayed single and dated periodically over the next couple of years, though it was difficult at first. The betrayal had left deep scars, and I found it hard to trust anyone. Every time a woman showed interest in me, I'd find myself looking for red flags, for signs that she was hiding something, that she was capable of the same kind of deception Gabrielle had perpetrated. It was exhausting, and more than once, I had considered just staying single for the rest of my life. But about 18 months after the divorce was finalized, I remembered what my boss Richard had said about singletune.com and decided to give it a try. I figured I had nothing to lose. The platform was different from other dating apps I'd tried. It actually seemed to filter out people who didn't share my values. There was a detailed questionnaire about relationship expectations, deal breakers, and core values. Singletune. Verify the vibe. Meet the one. The slogan had seemed cheesy at first, almost too good to be true, but it turned out to be surprisingly accurate. That's how I met Olivia Hartwell, a recent divorcee who'd also been burned by a cheating spouse. Her profile had been honest and straightforward, no games, no ambiguity. She'd written about her experience with infidelity and how it had changed her perspective on relationships. When we'd matched and started messaging, I'd felt an immediate connection. She understood the pain, the betrayal, the difficulty of trusting again. We dated for several months, each of us taking it slow and easy, neither of us wanting to rush into anything. Like me, she was still healing from her experience, still learning to trust again. I understood her pain on a visceral level and did all I could to support her, just as she supported me. The first few weeks, all we did was talk or go out for dinner and a movie. We'd spend hours in coffee shops or restaurants just talking about everything and nothing. Our childhoods, our dreams, our fears, our experiences with betrayal. She was a bit more fragile than I was at the time, more openly wounded, and I found myself wanting to protect her, to show her that not all men were like her ex-husband. We spent a lot of time holding hands and walking through the park near her condo, enjoying the simple pleasure of companionship without pressure or expectations. I was quite attracted to her. She was beautiful, intelligent, kind, but I decided to let her make the first move. I didn't want to push her into anything she wasn't ready for. One night, about 3 months into our relationship, after a delicious homemade lasagna at her condo, she'd looked at me as if studying me carefully, her eyes searching my face. "Do you find me attractive?" she'd asked suddenly, her voice uncertain. I'd smiled and looked her in the face, meeting her eyes directly. "I find you very attractive, in more ways than one. Physically, yes, but also intellectually, emotionally. I love spending time with you. Why do you ask?" "I was just wondering. You've never made a move on me beyond kissing. I was beginning to think that maybe you weren't interested in me that way, that maybe you just wanted to be friends." "Oh, I'm interested," I'd assured her. "Very interested. It's just once burned, twice shy, you know? I didn't want to push you into anything you weren't ready for. I wanted you to set the pace." "I guess I can understand that," she'd said softly. "But we're not all like your ex-wife. Some of us actually believe in loyalty and commitment." "True, and we're not all like your ex-husband. I happen to believe in the sanctity of marriage, in the promises we make to each other. When I commit to someone, I mean it." She'd smiled, and I'd seen relief in her eyes. "I know you do. I hope you realize I feel the same way. I would never do to you what was done to me. I know how much it hurts." "I do realize that. That's one of the things I love about you. So, what are you going to do with this little bit of information?" she'd asked, a playful edge creeping into her voice. "Do you think you could manage to do more than give me a kiss on the cheek?" "Where would you like me to kiss you?" I'd asked, teasing her, my voice dropping lower. She'd slowly lifted her dress over her waist, revealing that she wasn't wearing anything underneath, and given me a sultry smile that made my heart race. I'd smiled and gotten down between her legs, finally allowing myself to fully connect with her. Yeah, things were definitely looking good. 2 years later, Olivia and I got married in a small, intimate ceremony with close friends and family at a vineyard outside the city. It was everything my first wedding hadn't been: genuine, joyful, filled with people who truly cared about us. We built a life together based on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. Everything my first marriage had lacked. We talked about everything, never keeping secrets, never hiding things from each other. If something bothered one of us, we discussed it immediately rather than letting it fester. Sometimes I still thought about what happened with Gabrielle, especially when I'd see her around town, but those memories grew fainter with each passing year, losing their power to hurt me. I'd learned that some people aren't capable of the kind of commitment marriage requires. And that wasn't my fault. I'd also learned that real love doesn't involve humiliation, betrayal, or disrespect. Real love is what I found with Olivia, a partnership built on mutual respect, honest communication, and genuine affection. I was grateful every day that I'd had the courage to walk away from something toxic and wait for something genuine, something real. The pain of that December night had been excruciating, but it had led me to something better, something worth having. And for that, I couldn't bring myself to regret how things had turned out.